Rex Ryan went full boomer mode on national television, practically frothing at the mouth as he questioned Shedur's maturity, his leadership, and even his character. It wasn't just the usual "he's not ready for the league" analysis. This was personal. Rex didn't just critique Shedur's game, he dragged his entire persona. You could almost feel the spit flying through the screen. But instead of clapping back with a spicy quote or letting his PR team smooth it over, Shedur took a completely different route. No words. Just exaggerated, almost cartoonish mime moves, pretending to tape his own mouth shut, zipping it, throwing away the key. It was absurd, theatrical, and kind of brilliant. Cue the internet meltdown.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Some viewers instantly branded him immature. "This is why he's third string," they sneered. "Grow up, kid." The takes came in hot, fast, and loud, because nothing gets the sports world frothing like a young athlete who dares to show personality while also not speaking. But just as the mob was circling, NFL insider Mary Kay Cabot, yes, the Mary Kay herself, stepped into the ring, and let's just say Rex Ryan did not see it coming. Mary Kay, respected, seasoned, and not one for performative outrage, dropped a response that might as well have been a mic drop of her own. On a segment that should have been a throwaway, she calmly dismantled the narrative that Shedur's silence equaled immaturity. Instead, she called it strategic, mature even, and suddenly the script flipped. She pointed out what everyone had conveniently forgotten. Shedur Sanders has been under a microscope his entire life. Son of NFL legend Deion Sanders, face of one of college football's most polarizing teams, and now, a backup on a team that barely knows what stability looks like. Every move he makes is analyzed, dissected, and memed into oblivion. And in that context, silence becomes power. Mary Kay argued that Shedur's miming wasn't childish, it was controlled. It was calculated. He didn't take the bait. He didn't give Rex another soundbite. He flipped the dynamic. Instead of defending himself with words that would no doubt be twisted, he performed an absurdist act that rendered the entire controversy ridiculous. He turned the press conference into a silent protest. And that, Mary Kay said, is emotional intelligence. But let's rewind a second. Why was Rex Ryan even coming for Shedur this hard in the first place? Well, it's no secret Rex Ryan has a habit of turning criticism into performance art. He's like the Gordon Ramsay of sports commentary, loud, animated, and always teetering on the edge of, okay, that's too far. But this time, it wasn't about a bad pass or questionable stats. It was about maturity, entitlement, and whether Shedur respects the game. You can practically hear the dog whistles. This wasn't about football, it was about narrative control. Rex positioned himself as the old-school gatekeeper, calling out the flashy, social media-savvy new gen. And Shedur? He was the poster child for that generation. Camera-ready, meme-aware, and yes, maybe a little too famous for someone not starting on Sundays. But here's the thing, Shedur didn't ask for the spotlight. He was born in it. And after a turbulent transition to the NFL, where he went from college hero to practice squad afterthought, the guy has kept his head down. Sure, he still posts, still shows up in his dad's videos, but he hasn't melted down. He hasn't lashed out. He's grinding quietly, behind the scenes, in one of the most emotionally difficult positions in pro sports, being told you're not good enough yet while the whole world watches. So when Rex Ryan comes swinging out of nowhere and questions his character? Of course that hits different. Now, could Shedur have answered with a polished, media-trained soundbite about ignoring the noise? Absolutely. But would that have gone viral? Would that have made people stop and actually think about the absurdity of this whole drama machine? Probably not. That's why the mime act hit. It was satire. It was Shedur turning the mirror back on the media circus and saying, if you're going to turn me into a punchline, I'll beat you to it. And that's genius. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Some sports heads doubled down, calling the mime routine attention-seeking. Which is kind of hilarious because isn't that exactly what Rex was doing when he dragged a 22-year-old live on TV? Let's not pretend this is about Shedur's play. It's about control, who gets to speak how they speak and whether the old guard approves. Mary Kay thankfully wasn't here for that. She saw a kid trying to keep his cool in a pressure cooker. She saw someone who knows he has nothing to gain from snapping back at an ex-coach turned commentator. She saw restraint. And to be honest, so did a lot of people. Slowly the tide started to turn. Commentators began reframing the moment, calling it performance art or next-level media strategy. TikToks broke it down like it was a Jordan Peele movie. Suddenly, the guy everyone mocked for being silent? He had the last laugh. Meanwhile, Rex Ryan, well, let's just say the instant regret award for this week goes straight to him. Because once Mary Kay spoke, Rex didn't have much to say. He backpedaled, softened his tone. You could practically see the producers in his earpiece urging him to dial it back before he got dragged any harder. This whole mess is a case study in how media eats its young, and how the only way to win sometimes is to say nothing at all. Shedeur could have thrown a tantrum. He could have posted a Notes app apology. He could have shaded Rex in an Instagram story or quoted some Bible verse about judgment. Instead, he zips his lips, does a few mime tricks, and walks away. It's ridiculous. It's genius. It's 2025. And it works. Because here we are, still talking about it. In the end, this isn't about whether Shedeur starts for the Browns next season. It's not even really about Rex Ryan's take. It's about the way we expect young athletes to be polished, poised, and perfect 24/7, while also demanding they be real and authentic. It's about the impossibility of navigating that contradiction. Shedeur played the game differently. He didn't break. He bent the narrative to his will. And that takes serious skill, not just on the field but in life. So what's the moral here? Maybe it's that silence really can be golden, especially when it's wearing metaphorical white gloves and fake pulling an invisible rope. Or maybe it's just this. If you're gonna clown a 22-year-old who's trying to figure it out in real time, be ready when someone smarter than you calls it what it is, bullying in a suit and tie. The NFL loves to say, protect the shield. But sometimes someone needs to protect the players. The young ones. The quiet ones. The ones who mime because it's safer than screaming. And maybe, just maybe, that's what maturity actually looks like. So what do you think? Was Shedeur's silence a mic drop, or a meltdown? Did Rex cross a line, or was this just business as usual in the sports media circus? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more weekly drama breakdowns, because in a world where press conferences become performance art, you're gonna want front row seats. The league, and the media machine orbiting it, loves to build you up just to see how fast they can break you. And for someone like Shedeur, a quarterback who didn't come from obscurity, who walked in with followers and endorsement deals before he even threw an NFL pass, he's not just playing football. He's playing chess on a PR battlefield. And you could feel that tension crackling through the screen when he walked up to that podium. There was a moment, blink and you miss it, where he glanced out at the press corps, took a breath, and you could almost see the thought cross his mind, whatever I say right now, it's going to be used against me. So he said nothing. He made them all wait, shifted in his seat, tilted his head. And then slowly, deliberately, he locked his lips with an invisible key and mimed tossing it over his shoulder. It was so unexpected, so out of place in the usual NFL script, that everyone just froze. Like the room short-circuited. You could practically hear the internal panic of 100 sports reporters. Wait, is this performance art? Do we clap? Of course online? Chaos. Immediate. Within minutes, the clip had gone viral. Not just sports Twitter, actual Twitter. The type of virality that leaks into group chats and explainer videos and TikTok thirst edits with captions like, "He's so unserious for this." But somewhere between the memes and the outrage, people missed the deeper message. Shedeur knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't need to say a word because Rex Ryan had already said too much. Shedeur understood that fighting fire with fire wouldn't help him, it would just feed the flames. And let's be honest, Rex thrives on that. The controversy. The blowback. The attention. That's his currency now. But Shedeur refused to pay. And honestly, it's kind of iconic. Because when you think about it, what's more threatening to a loudmouth critic than a target who refuses to talk back? Silence isn't passive, it's strategic. It takes restraint. It takes poise. It forces people to sit with their own words instead of bouncing off someone else's reaction. And in that silence, Rex Ryan started to squirm. The next day he was already backpedaling, sort of trying to walk the line between just doing my job and maybe I came off a little harsh. It was subtle, but you could hear it. That twitch in the voice when someone realizes they may have underestimated their opponent. And Mary Kay? She saw all of it. She didn't just defend Shedeur because she felt sorry for him, she defended him because she saw a deeper game being played. She recognized the poise it took to not retaliate. She saw the intelligence behind the silence. And maybe most importantly, she saw a young man who was still trying to be young in a world that wants him to grow up overnight, act perfectly, and never slip. Because here's what no one talks about. Being the third-string quarterback might sound like a cushy gig, low expectations, no pressure, but it's brutal. Especially for someone who was once the face of college football. Every practice becomes a silent test. Every rep is scrutinized. And every mistake feels like confirmation that you don't belong. Now add a viral controversy on top of that? Yeah, that's a mental minefield. But Shedur's been here before. Maybe not exactly this, but the pressure? The scrutiny? The expectations of perfection with none of the forgiveness for being human? That's been his entire life. And while it might have cracked someone else, Shedur leaned into the absurdity. He performed a mime act instead of a meltdown. And that choice said more than 1,000 press conference quotes ever could. Meanwhile, the media keeps spinning. People are still arguing, was it funny or disrespectful? Was it calculated or childish? Should he be focusing on football or building a brand? But maybe that's the whole point. Shedur Sanders isn't playing their game. He's playing his. And for someone barely out of college, he's already mastered the art of flipping a narrative, of weaponizing attention without getting swallowed by it. And that's terrifying to people like Rex Ryan. Because once you stop being rattled by the noise, you stop being easy to control. Let's be real, if Shedur had responded the normal way, if he delivered a stiff, media-trained quote about not listening to outside opinions, or just focusing on the playbook, nobody would still be talking about it. It would have been a blip. Forgotten in 24 hours. Instead, his mime act stopped the cycle. It turned the press conference into theater. It made the critics look ridiculous. It made people think. And that's what Mary Kay recognized. Not just restraint, but performance with purpose. It's not about whether he wins the starting job. It's about whether he survives this season with his sanity and self-worth intact. Because make no mistake, there are forces working against him. Not just media figures with vendettas, but the subtle, insidious expectation that young athletes must constantly apologize for their confidence. That they must downplay their own light so others feel comfortable. But Shedur? He's not dimming anything. He's just choosing when and how to speak. And sometimes, silence speaks loudest. There's something oddly poetic about it all. A player who grew up in the spotlight, who has every reason to lash out or crumble, instead chooses absurdist theater to express his boundaries. It's like if Marcel Marceau was a backup QB with a chip on his shoulder and $1 million smile. And what's wild is this might actually help him. Not just reputationally but mentally. Because that mime routine? That was catharsis. That was him taking back control in a world that constantly tries to wrest it from him. It was a moment of clarity in the chaos. And whether or not you liked it, it worked. Because here we are, days later, still talking about it. Still wondering what it meant. Still questioning who really came out on top. So yeah, maybe it wasn't the traditional way to handle criticism. But maybe tradition needs to be questioned. Maybe a little performance art is exactly what the NFL media cycle needs. A jolt, a twist, something different. Because if this league is going to keep putting these young men under a microscope, the least we can do is allow them to respond in a way that's authentically them. Even if it's unconventional. Even if it's weird. Even if it makes Rex Ryan look a little silly in the process. At the end of the day, Shedur didn't punch back. He didn't spiral. He didn't let it break him. He mimed. He smiled. He walked away. And in a world that demands outrage, that demands sound bites, that thrives on drama, that is a power move. And here's the twist that makes this whole thing even juicier. It wasn't just Shedur's mime moment that went viral, it was the ripple effect. The awkward silence in the room. The reporters not knowing whether to laugh, clap, or end the presser. The NFL social media accounts not even knowing if they should repost it. Everyone was frozen in this weird limbo of, was that genius or childish? And the fact that no one could agree? That was the real win. Because here's the dirty little secret. The sports media cycle needs controversy. It runs on it. It eats outrage for breakfast and pukes out recycled takes for dinner. But it doesn't quite know what to do when the subject of that outrage refuses to play the game. When the subject holds up a mirror and turns the press conference into performance art, the whole machine stutters. Shedur didn't just dodge a trap, he turned the trap inside out and made it the punchline. And that is so much more dangerous to people like Rex Ryan than some emotional rebuttal ever could be. Because when a young player controls the narrative, suddenly they're the one writing the headlines. Suddenly the hot take guys don't have the monopoly on public perception anymore. And nothing bruises an ego like a kid with a camera, a platform, and enough savvy to flip a scandal on its head. Let's talk about the energy shift for a second. After Shedur's little mime stunt, the whole vibe around him changed. At first, sure, there was confusion. Then mockery. But then, respect. Not from everyone, obviously. This is the NFL we're talking about, where showing emotion gets you branded soft, and showing personality makes you a distraction. But from fans? From fellow players? From people who've been under the microscope? They got it. They understood. Because here's what people forget. The mental side of this game is brutal. You've got guys in their early 20s juggling intense physical training, complex playbooks, media obligations, fan expectations, and the ever-looming threat of being cut or benched. Add to that the legacy pressure of being Deion Sanders' son, and the fact that Shedur's every move is already 10 times louder than anyone else's on the roster, and suddenly a press conference becomes a minefield. One wrong word? You're labeled entitled. One frustrated facial expression? You're too emotional. One harmless joke? You're not taking it seriously. And yet, one mime routine? Now that's unprofessional. It's almost laughable. The double standard is exhausting. Because if this had been a veteran player, or someone with a ring, or someone the media likes, the take would have been completely different. We'd be calling it an innovative response to media pressure, or a masterclass in avoiding controversy. But because it's Shedur, the standards are warped. And Rex Ryan's reaction is a textbook example of that bias. He didn't critique Shedur's throwing mechanics. He didn't break down a poor read or a bad decision on the field. He made it personal. He went after maturity, character, how he carries himself. That's the go-to move when someone wants to discredit you without citing anything real. But the minute Mary Kay stepped in and said, "Hold on, there's more to this," the cracks started to show. Because let's be honest, Rex doesn't like being challenged, especially not by someone with more credibility than bluster. And Mary Kay? She's not about drama. She's about facts. She's not afraid to cut through the noise and point out the obvious. That Shedur's response was not only intentional, it was effective. Because now, instead of talking about how he's third string, everyone's talking about how he handled the moment. And in a league where perception often dictates opportunity, that matters a lot. Let's also talk about the psychological warfare that comes with being in Shedur's position. You're not just battling for a job, you're battling a narrative. Every time you step on the field, every time you speak, every time you don't speak, you're being compared to your past self, to your famous father, to quarterbacks who've been in the league twice as long, to expectations you never even agreed to carry. And in that context, choosing not to engage? That's discipline. That's maturity. That's someone who's playing the long game. You think Shedur doesn't hear the chatter? You think he doesn't see the memes, the clips, the hot takes, the speculative columns about his attitude and fit in the locker room? Of course he does. You'd have to be delusional to think he's not aware of every single headline. But awareness doesn't always require response. Sometimes it just requires understanding. And what Shedur understood in that moment was this: nothing he could have said would have changed the story. But a well-timed silence? That rewrote it. And isn't that what we ask of young players? To show maturity? To think before they speak? To let their play do the talking? Well, he didn't speak. He didn't lash out. He didn't spiral. He showed up, faced the noise, and stood still in the middle of a storm. So maybe, just maybe, that was the most mature move of all. But of course that doesn't sell the same way as a juicy quote. It doesn't give the pundits sound bites. So they get mad. They call it disrespectful. They pretend they were owed something. Let's get real, the media wants control. They want predictable reactions. They want athletes to say just enough to keep the cycle spinning, but not enough to actually challenge the status quo. So when someone like Shedur sidesteps the whole system with one bizarre, silent act, that's a glitch in the matrix. And we love a good glitch. Because it forces us to ask better questions. Not, is Shedur too cocky for the league? But, why are we still policing how young athletes respond to criticism? Not, did Rex Ryan go too far? But, why is it always the old guard dragging down the new? Not, was the mime routine out of pocket? But, why does it bother us when someone refuses to give us a soundbite? At the end of the day, this wasn't about a mime routine. It was about power. About who gets to shape the story. And for once, the power didn't belong to the guy with the mic, or the analyst in the studio. It belonged to the kid who said nothing at all. So maybe this is the beginning of something bigger. Maybe we're watching the next wave of athlete media dynamics evolve in real time. Maybe the era of post-game cliches and stiff pressers is coming to an end. Maybe silence is the new statement. Or maybe this was just a one-off. A moment of frustration turned into a moment of clarity. A young man choosing to protect his peace in the weirdest, most unforgettable way possible. Whatever it was, it worked. Because Shedur Sanders didn't just control the moment. He owned it. And the best part? He did it without saying a single word. Now that's how you shift a narrative. Let us know your take. Was it immature? Mastermind move? Somewhere in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Because if this is how Shedeur Sanders handles his critics in October, just wait until December. Because think about what it must have taken to sit there, under the fluorescent lights, knowing full well that a room full of reporters were practically foaming at the mouth to get a reaction out of you, and to choose not to give them one? That's restraint. That's poise. That's someone who knows what the game really is. And if you need even more evidence that Shedeur understood the assignment, look no further than the aftermath. Suddenly Rex Ryan, so bold, so loud just a few days earlier, was quieting down. He wasn't doubling down like he usually does. He wasn't reveling in the viral attention. He was oddly muted. Because whether he'll admit it or not, he knew he'd gotten outmaneuvered, outclassed, outplayed. Not on the field, but in the arena of public perception. And in today's NFL, that matters almost as much. Shedeur flipped the power dynamic. He made himself the one holding the mic, even without saying a single word. And while some people were busy debating the optics, the smart ones realized what had just happened. This wasn't just a quarterback dodging a scandal. This was a rookie quarterback demonstrating more media savvy, emotional control, and narrative awareness than most 10-year veterans. This was a rookie quarterback taking back his dignity on his own terms, in the middle of a league that's constantly trying to strip it away. That's not immaturity. That's strategy. And look, we're not saying Shedeur is perfect. He's still got things to prove. Still needs to work his way up that depth chart. Still needs to show on the field that the hype is justified. But guess what? That's true of every young player. And the difference is, most of them never even get the chance to shape their own narrative. Shedeur just did it in one weird, unforgettable press conference. So if nothing else, give the man credit where it's due. Because while other players are out here throwing helmets or deleting tweets, Shedeur Sanders is silently miming circles around his critics, and turning a media circus into his own one-man show. And in this era of sports, where perception is everything and the spotlight burns hot enough to melt steel, that kind of control? That's not just rare. That's dangerous. And something tells us, Rex Ryan won't be poking the mime again anytime soon.